in control against our Tosis debate and keep going back and forth.
That'll be easy.
More field stabilized. For the turn of the heat. We gotta move.
Welcome to State of the Game for May 17th, and my name is JP McDaniel. This is a very special cast today. We've got In Control and Tyler, two of probably my best friends to ever be on the cast, one of the oldest cast members that we ever had as well, and we've got our very special guest from Blizzard Entertainment, senior game designer David Kim. David, welcome to the show, and why don't we just start off, and why don't you introduce yourself to those that may not know who you are?
Yes, I'm a senior game designer at Blizzard. I'm on the StarCraft team, and I'm working on the multiplayer game of StarCraft 2.
All right. Well, I do want to state, before we really get into this, that there is a ton of stuff that we could cover, and we only have about an hour to do it. So because of that, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we're not going to go through each matchup one by one and hit on that. We're really going to try to cover kind of the big topic, stuff that we feel like needs to be talked about. And because of that, don't expect every question to be asked. Like, we could not possibly do that, even if we had 24 hours with David. It is not possible. So now that that's kind of done with, let's go ahead and just get it started with. And my initial question is, just to start things off, how does Blizzard approach game design? Where do you guys really approach balance from?
So I would actually say that changed a lot since we shipped Wings and then throughout HOTS beta. And right now, I think where we're at is we try to focus as much as possible on both the pro side of things as well as our community, and try to make the correct decision based on the current metagame of StarCraft 2. So for example, a lot of the new units we added, like the Tempest, is just a straight up counter to the late game really stalemate situations. So we tried our best to kind of locate issues within Wings of Liberty, and through the new units, we tried to get the game a little more dynamic, as well as fix problems that existed in Wings of Liberty.
Jeff, go ahead.
Okay, so, well, I don't really have a follow-up to that. I mean, I kind of understood how you guys have spoken a lot about how you kind of balance out in Heart of the Swarm. So, just have some questions for you. First and foremost, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. And these are in no particular order, but I just kind of thought up questions that I pulled from my community fan page, and then also just my Twitter in general. But one of the ones I want to start off with is Wings Liberty was kind of, especially towards the end of Wings Liberty, it was very much so becoming a game that people were considering kind of stagnating. They were kind of throwing around that it wasn't living up to the excitement. I mean, it felt like StarCraft 2 came out, everyone got really excited about it, Twitch, everyone got on board, it was really big, but then as the game developed, strategy seemed to stagnate, in particular Zerg, Broodlord, Infestor, Corruptor. So I guess my question for you would be like, HOTS right now is considered really exciting, really good, whereas Wings of Liberty was considered pretty bad towards the end. What do you attribute from that transition? Like, what did Blizzard learn from Wings of Liberty that they're now applying to Heart of the Swarm, and why do you think it's more of a success?
Yeah, so your specific example, we would totally agree that it was problematic at the Wings of Liberty, at the end of Wings of Liberty. But so one of our major goals in Heart of the Swarm was to try to make a game where players want to go on the offense, so that there's more action throughout the whole game, and no one side wants to just sit back for 40 minutes, 50 minutes, doing nothing but building spine crawlers, getting your broodlords and infestors out. So that's why that's one of the reasons why infestors were nerfed so hard, and also things like medevacs or oracles and all these more aggressive options were introduced. And I think we were quite successful at the beginning of Heart of the Swarm, at least, in achieving that goal. And whenever problems like that arise again, we will definitely take measures to address those, so that it doesn't happen for like a year or 6 months, and then we can kind of limit the boring, like really boring games to watch, and we really want to focus on kind of the aggressive gameplay for pro players, and for viewers, it's just more exciting because there's a lot of things going on, and each game plays out a little more differently.
So as kind of a follow-up to that then, is it safe to say then that Blizzard is aware of the boring, slow, like Broodlord Infestor play that happened in Wings of Liberty, and you're actively working against that in Heart of the Swarm? So the follow-up to that would be then, what do you guys think about what we've seen a few times? It hasn't quite become the meta game for Zerg, but the Swarmhost static defense Viper style in ZVP that can kind of be similar to that Broodlord style in Wings of Liberty.
Yeah, so I think one of the most interesting things about Swarmhost is that a lot of people thought it was completely useless at the beginning of Heart of the Swarm, and nowadays, the past like 2 or 3 weeks, we're seeing a lot of Swarmhost play, and I think we're seeing two different Swarmhost styles, especially against Protoss. One is the one you said. The other, I think, is I think just this week there was a game on Daybreak where one of the Korean players in GSL used Swarmhost very aggressively. He would move them up to the 12 o'clock location, spawn a set of locusts, move down, spawn another set. So we're seeing these two types, and if it becomes the case that the one that you mentioned, the super defensive, sunken up, just send locusts for 20 minutes doing nothing. If that becomes really popular and that's the best way to play, we will definitely try to take measures to fix that. And on the flip side, if it's the case that the more aggressive option is the better way to go, then I think that's a huge plus to the game.
Okay, I've got a question.
We'll keep watching. Yep.
Okay, I got a question. Kind of, it's not exactly balance related, but it's definitely design related. And a lot of people talk about so-called quality of life changes, where you kind of. Oh, you can't hear me? Can other people hear me?
No, I can.
Okay.
You're good.
So a quality of life change where you kind of make something in the interface a little more easier to deal with. And one example would be for Zergs and burrow. If they have a lot of roaches and they're burrow microing, and they select all of their roaches, and some are burrowed and some are unburrowed, there's only one key to hit. So they either all burrow or all unburrow, but they can't like have a toggle, like two different keys. Like, I want these to unburrow, these to burrow. And so that's kind of a situation where you can argue, okay, that's making Zerg more powerful if you give them that little extra better control, but at the same time, it's something that makes the game a little bit easier for newer players, and it's something that if you look at other races like Siege and On Siege, or just any kind of toggle is kind of, this is an exception to that rule. So how do you look at that as a designer when you hear, like, I know TLO has complained about this a lot. How do you look at a situation like that?
So for Terran units in general, like siege tanks, for example, it's not uncommon that some siege tanks are in siege mode and some are in tank mode, and you control both at the same time, and that's the main reason why we split it up like that. And for burrow, especially in Wings of Liberty, most of the use cases for burrow was you either, especially for the lower level players that you're pointing out, was you either burrow your whole army or you unburrow your whole army, and the burrowing one at a time case was a lot more at the higher levels. So that's why we made the decision of going with this method, because we figured higher level players like TLO can more than easily manage something like that, whereas lower level players who are not burrowing individual units as much can have the better general case of burrowing everything at the same time or unburrowing everything at the same time. But it is something that's not, I mean, it doesn't have to be set in complete stone, so it's definitely a good suggestion, and I'll bring it to my team and then we'll discuss it once again.
For example, like I think I heard Blizzard say that they were interested in seeing more burrow play early in the game. For sure. And I think, so would that kind of change? Would you look at something like that and be like, well, if we make it a little bit easier to micro, then would that would promote that kind of play?
That could, but I don't think making the game easier to play is the solution for the pro level. I think a better solution would be if going on the offense with early burrow is a better way to play, and with certain strategies, that might be a little more interesting. And if we keep the controls a little hard for the pro players, then we might get a little more variety in terms of if, say, like Life uses them, it's a little stronger than, say, like an average Korean pro player uses it, then that difference, I think, seeing that difference is really cool too. So
Sure, yeah.
yeah, we'll just have to
definitely.
think about it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So my question kind of has to do with when the community sees or views a game in a GSL or an MLG, whatever tournament, and immediately those threads pop up on Reddit and on Team Liquid where they're just constantly saying like, oh, this needs a nerf, that needs a nerf, I can't believe that's in the game, it's overpowered. How quickly is the balance team noticing that or thinking about that and possibly responding to it internally before we ever see anything come out kind of in the public eye?
We're pretty much seeing it at the same time as you guys, because we actually have a lot of people on the multiplayer design team, on the balance team, as well as our community team members are watching as many games as they can, as well as we're keeping tabs on all the major websites. So we see the issues right when they come up, but in general, I think the correct way to go about it in a live game is to not make such rash decisions so quickly, but rather just watch how the game evolves. So, for example, I think at the beginning of Heart of the Swarm, a lot of pro players were saying, Protoss players were saying, medevacs are impossible to stop, and it's impossible to get the third up because all Terran needs to do is load up everything into 4 medevacs and then drop the main, and there's no way to protect both the main and the third on most maps. But now the opinion has kind of turned, and we're getting a lot of Korean pro player feedback saying it's really hard for Terran to assault a Protoss base because Mothership Core is too strong. So I think that's a good example of had we gone in and fixed or nerfed medevacs too early, too soon, then I think Terran would have an even harder time than pro players are describing right now. And at the same time, if we just react on Mothership Core being too strong, on that specific feedback so quickly, then the opposite can happen. So I think just taking our time to really make sure what are problems and just dealing with them slowly over time is the way to go.
Gotcha.
Okay. So one of the biggest issues I feel like in Heart of the Swarm, and certainly this has been discussed and addressed even in your last balance patch, is ZVZ and HOTS. I see you guys talking a lot about it. I've read all the comments. You're looking at the Spore Crawler, you gave it another buff as a way to try to promote non-Mutalisk play.
Yeah.
But in general, like, what's your more candid thoughts on this? Like, what are some of the ideas kicking around? Because the Spore Crawler, I think you guys you have a tough issue, but I don't know that the Spore Crawler is the answer, and I'm pretty sure you guys would probably say the same.
Yeah, I don't. First of all, I wouldn't agree that the ZVZ issue was addressed. I think it was a step in the right direction, but that's what I was talking about before too. I think it's better to solve problems in smaller steps because, for example, we do agree that seeing Ling Muta play in ZVZ every single game is a problem, but we don't want to just get rid of it. Like, we don't want to change the metagame to something else. Like, we want to see a little less of it and a little more of other strats. So by doing smaller changes, I think we can kind of see how much has this strat been reduced. Because, for example, a lot of the comments, even the people that are saying the change did nothing, even those posts, we're seeing people say things like, all it did was delay the Mutalisk attack timing a little bit or whatever. So that to us kind of means, yeah, if the Mutalisk attack timing is delayed, that means there's more time to do something else. So just by checking what the effects are of these small changes, I think over time we can kind of address the ZVZ issue, and the ZVZ issue is definitely at the top of our list. We don't think it's completely solved or anything. And it's only been like a week or less since the patch came out, so we are still looking to make sure what exactly this change did before making additional moves.
Well, what about, like, if we look at Brood War was absolutely 99% Mutalisk, Ling, Scourge, but I think the reason why it remained really exciting was because it was universally appreciated what was going on inside the game in terms of micro. Like, even if I'm a layman player looking on, I can witness smaller unit counts, really interesting engagement. It was not just a move, and then something one, which is generic and bland for just about everybody, unless there's some diversity in that fight, and then it might be visually appealing for someone that doesn't know StarCraft. But in StarCraft 2, I feel like one of the issues that kind of runs rampant throughout perhaps the entire game, and certainly there's been steps taken into that, like with the carrier micro trying to be implemented, but in ZVZ, I see this being most problematic, especially when a lot of the rhetoric coming out from you guys is like, well, we're considering, tinkering with like the infestor to try to get that involved. But the infestor seems to be more of a like anti-micro unit. Of course, that's certainly less the case with the skill shot being added to the fungal, which is really cool. But is there any way we could actually have some form of like maybe the metagame dictates itself, but the micro inside the matchup in ZVZ is what creates the excitement, or is that just with the engine too hard to do?
I would actually argue the micro is could be a lot harder because you have units like banelings that could take out like 20 zerglings if you're not microing well, and there's just more options, and I think it's hard to compare the two games like that because SC1 was more so accepted as a game where you set your strategies. There's pretty much one way to play each matchup, and and each unit composition wasn't as diverse as StarCraft 2 is. So, for example, if you look at Protoss army compositions in StarCraft 2, you pretty much use every single A unit late game, a lot of the robo units. Yeah, except some units, but the unit composition still revolves around like 5 to 10 different units. Whereas in StarCraft 2, whereas in StarCraft 1, that wasn't the case. So I think there's just two completely different games. And yeah, I think in general, we
so you
do
guys
have
would be looking
micro
more at like
things.
balance as opposed to, baneling micro, sure, but I think
Mutalisk micro.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
A
you would
little
like
bit of
ideally
Mutalisk micro.
You would like for each matchup to be able to like develop strategically like throughout the game, like an early game, a mid game, and a late game. And in Brood War ZVZ, it was pretty much okay. There's a little bit of early game Ling stuff going on, and then everyone's got Muta Scourge, and it's probably going to end there. But I could see the
you saw,
potential.
like Devourers coming in or whatever, which was kind of cool.
Right.
That was only like one out of hundreds of games. Yeah.
Pretty rare. But in StarCraft 2, I could see the potential for a lot more like shifts going on where you're caught in between different compositions and you're trying to get a few of these new units out and a lot more diversity. I could see that happening for sure.
Yeah.
Tyler, go ahead if you have a
All right.
question.
Yeah, I got a question. Well, since I just took a little jab at the carrier, I'll go ahead and lay in here. Well, first, what are your thoughts on the carrier? What do you see as the future of the carrier?
So what we don't like about the carrier is you just can't build a lot of them. A pro player using them has not that much difference. Like there's not as many cool things a pro player can do with a carrier than just a normal high level player. So those two things I think are the biggest downsides. But the idea of a unit that sends out these smaller interceptors that do.
You're quite fond of that idea, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that's kind of cool. But I don't think that's at the top of our list or anything because the way we see it is we don't think every single unit in the game has to be good for pro level play. Like some units can cater to lower level players. Some units can cater to people that like doing specific kind of different but less optimal things. So, but we would like to see a little more carrier usage, and I think Mothership is a good example of that. Back when Wings of Liberty, when we saw motherships in every single PvZ game, it wasn't that exciting because, for many reasons, because you had the Vortex issue, you had the similar issues as a carrier of if you build a mothership core, or if you build a mothership as a pro player, there's not much to show off in terms of skill and micro. So we put it in a place, and it's not that we never see motherships in play. We do still see it, especially against mass swarm hosts. We're kind of seeing people that do play heavy swarm host styles. If Protoss player gets out a mothership and uses a cloaking field, defending against them is a lot easier. So we do still see it a little bit, and I think somewhere along those lines is a good place for not only the carrier but also the battlecruiser. But like I said before, I don't think that's a game-breaking issue if we never see carriers in pro-level games. So, but it is still a minor issue that we will be talking about. Yeah.
And I have a related, but it's kind of a lot different in nature question, and it's not really talking about current balance, but looking back at how you designed the game earlier and kind of a retrospective. And I think the decision to make the Colossus targetable for air-to-air fire, and then making units like Vikings and Corruptors, and now we have Tempests that destroy Colossus. Do you think you know, because all throughout Wings of Liberty, skytoss was kind of not a thing. We had the one fling
Yeah.
with Void Ray Colossus, and that went away, but skytoss was terrible. Do you think that was largely the Colossus's fault because you had to balance the Colossus for air-to-air attacks, and then skytoss was just like, well, you couldn't give us something powerful for skytoss because then that's too strong with the Colossus. Or do you
I don't
regret
think
the
so,
Colossus at all?
I don't think that's the reason because what are the two core units for going air toss? I think it's Phoenix and Void Ray. And in Wings of Liberty, Phoenix was still good, but Void Ray was so random. We would do tests. We would do tests for cost, and in smaller scale, Void Rays were a little more consistent. But if you go to larger scales, its counters were starting to beat it just randomly because of how the beam used to work. So I think the main reason we're seeing more skytoss right now is because we fixed the Void Ray, not because the Colossus is bad. And for the Colossus specifically, I think what that change did, what that did of like enemy players being able to use anti-air units only to target down the Colossus, I think was as a change that was a decision that we're satisfied with because you get additional gameplay like your Viking positioning matters versus I'm trying to focus them down with stalkers, blink at the right times, all that stuff. Same with corruptors. So while Vikings or corruptors are not that exciting of units, they do provide a lot of moments that are kind of exciting because of the Colossus. If the Colossus wasn't built that way, then there's no reason to go Vikings. There's no reason to go corruptors against a ground-based Protoss, which I think is a little less exciting to watch.
I want to hit on something you said in there with these internal tests. What other kind of tests are you guys doing kind of when you look at a specific unit or something in a matchup? You said you had one for the unit cost. Is that what you referenced in the last one?
Yeah.
What are some of these other tests that you guys do?
So back in Wings of Liberty, we used to do a lot of these tests, and we used a lot of Excel sheets, a lot of that. But what we learned in Heart of the Swarm beta is that can only get you so far. So we try our best to kind of play real games with higher level players around the company. So like our balance team actually consists of multiple people that are not just on the StarCraft development team, but we take people from across the company. So we have someone from the cinematics team, we have someone from the new MMO team, and so on. So we try our best to kind of create more fluid playing ground while testing the new units. But some of the things that we have is like you can do this unit for cost against this unit X number of times, or you can do this unit composition against this unit composition for cost. We can do stuff like that, but I don't think that should be the main way to test the balance in StarCraft 2.
One last follow-up, then I'll let the other guys get in here. You mentioned the fact that you're pulling players from these other portions of the company. Have you ever thought, or have you actually reached out to players and had them send you replays or consulted them on a kind of a professional level and see how they are looking at the game, or potentially brought them into a discussion with some of the balance designers?
We always do, actually. So what's funny is in Wings of Liberty, a lot of the pro players were on MSN Messenger. Now no one is. So I'm kind of using Facebook as like one of the main methods to communicate. And just today or just yesterday, I was talking to pro players. And it's a pretty common thing for pro players to send us replays or just have discussions going. And I think this morning I was talking to the IM team manager, and he was saying, I was asking him, I'm going to go on State of the Game, and what are your thoughts about the game? And then he said, just looking at all these players that are playing and practicing on a daily basis, he thinks the balance is really solid. And I was also talking to Engine, which I think he's one of the smartest people, I think, in the community. And he thinks PvT is a little difficult for Terran, maybe, but that's only a maybe. And just overall, he thinks everything's pretty good. So we try our best to really talk to and stay connected with the pro players.
Interesting. Jeff? Or Tyler, whoever wants to.
Tyler, go ahead.
I'll go for one. On the topic of talking with pro players, I kind of had a question like, and I don't really have a good current example, but let's just talk kind of hypothetically. If there was a really problematic matchup, and then you had one player who was successful with kind of an oddball style, like if we look at SOS, the way he just played his PvZ series, he's really weird. And now let's say like PVZ was in balance, like it was really good for Zerg, and he was able to succeed with this really weird style. Can one performance, like one example of a player showing a new style being successful, can that like kind of halt you in your tracks and like say, okay, we don't need to respond to this quite yet. Let's definitely wait and see how this develops. And do you tell complaining Protoss players in that situation, well, you need to work on what this guy's doing because it's working? Do you have that kind of communication with the pros?
Yeah, or I think another good example is what Roro did in the same matchup last week or the week before, and then a lot of the Zerg players kind of took that strategy and used it for themselves too. And I think something like that, we don't really have to point pros to because they're also watching the games, and if they think they see something that's really strong, then they are pretty good at adapting to the new way of playing. So for us, it's more like it's not like just because one person is doing this may be a problem, but more so, is it going to spread and is everyone going to play like that from now on? Or if the opposite is true, say SOS's play style this week, it worked, maybe because Zerg players weren't expecting it. That could also be the case. So I think either way, no matter what, we have to wait and see how the game goes before making a decision. And based off of one person, we are seeing is that if one person just comes up with something totally new, something totally strong, then other pro players are pretty quick about picking up that strategy.
So I guess the more diverse the strategies are out there being used in the highest level tournaments at the moment, the less likely you are to make a change. Would that be sort of fair to say? I mean, assuming that the stats are fairly even. It's not like 60% win for one race in a matchup. If it's, maybe around 55% and you're seeing some like kind of weird new strats, more diversity, then you'll likely hold off more. But if every pro has agreed this is the best way to play and you can only get 45% win rate with that and it's kind of stagnated, that's when you're like, okay, we got to do something ASAP.
So I actually argue that even if the win ratio in a matchup, say like PVZ, is 45 to 55, that's not that problematic as long as the games are really fun to watch and super diverse in terms of how players are playing and just really exciting, because 45% to 55% I don't think is that big of a deal at that level, because it's not just about the specific numbers, it's also about how exciting are those games, or how fun is it for me to watch. So if that's the case, then we probably wouldn't go in. But whereas on the flip side, if the numbers are 50-50, but we see Brulord Infestor every game, super boring to watch, then I think we would go in and change something about that matchup to fix it. But obviously, it can't be too bad, right? Like if it's like 70-30, something huge, if it's like 80-20, of course, even if it's exciting to watch, we still have to go in and make some changes to address that. But if it's something as low as 45, 55, then I don't think that's that big of an issue.
Okay.
Which units are you most disappointed in, and which units are you happiest with?
So if you asked me that like 3 weeks ago, I would have said Tempest and Swarmhosts were disappointed in, but now both of those units are being used at critical locations. I mean, just this week or last week, I think I saw some games where Tempests were used against Zerg, and without Tempest, I could have seen what's Protoss supposed to do, right? So
right.
I think that opinion kind of changed, and I think the answer is it's kind of early still to say which units were successful and which weren't.
Yeah, hell back. Go ahead and say.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, yeah, if you asked me that like 3 weeks ago, my answer would have been totally different. So I think we should keep watching and seeing.
All right.
Very nice political move, David. Yeah, very well played, sir.
I think with that, we'll take a quick little break. When we come back, we'll have about another half hour with David Kim. So be right back, guys. More State of the Game coming up right after this.